you can say that we're just like ants on this little trivial planet out on the edge of one of 100 million galaxies, and that what's happening here has no cosmic significance. But that's an arbitrary proposition, I mean, we're very complicated things, and whatever's going on this planet has to do with conscious reality. And the transformations of consciousness, for all we know, might be the most important things that happen everywhere. There's no reason to consider consciousness a trivial phenomenon. I mean, it's taken 3.5 billion years for you to develop the brain that you've developed. And human beings are amazing creatures. I mean, just a casual walk through YouTube and all those crazy kids that climb cranes and do that. What's that? Yeah, parkour, man. That stuff's unbelievable, I mean, human beings are crazy, crazy animals. There's almost nothing we can't do. And I'm very loath to assume that the transformations of consciousness that are described in the early stories in the biblical accounts are somehow cosmically trivial. It doesn't strike me that way, and it's certainly not self-evident. And even if they are cosmically trivial, whatever that means, the rocks don't care what you think. Well, who cares what the rocks think? First, they don't think. So I don't see why that's exactly relevant. But even if it's all the same to the cosmos, which is something that I doubt, it's certainly not just all the same to you, because your consciousness has a quality and it matters. Heidegger, for example, who's a philosopher whose writing sort of influenced me post hoc, because I recreated some of the things that he had talked about in the 30s before I knew much about him. But one of the things that Heidegger said was that the fundamental element of human being, of human phenomenology, was care. He said that that's the basic essence of your being, is that you care about things. And that's either negatively or positively, right? To not care about something or to hate it is still to be involved in care. And so, even if the cosmos itself is neutral with regards to our existence, we're not, and we're the only things that we know of that are conscious, and so, well, we might as well go with that. And there's no reason. See, I can't help but think that the constant attempts by people to trivialize the nature of their own consciousness has a dark side. I'm a psychoanalyst, and so I always think that way. It's like, well, first of all, if you as a being don't matter, then you don't have to do anything. It's a great justification for total lack of responsibility. And that really twigs something for me, because, people who are bent, let's say, or vengeful or angry are always looking for a reason why they don't have to be responsible for anything. Plus, it's a lot easier. And so the notion that consciousness is trivial immediately allows you to wander down that path. And so I'm skeptical of those claims. And I also think that there's a deep hatred of humanity that underlies those claims as well. And I read my YouTube comments sometimes, and I've always been annoyed that, because I've heard like sort of radical, clueless environmentalists say things like the planet would be better off without people on it, which is something that, like, you just cannot say that. If you say that and listen to yourself, you should go to a monastery for 3 years and never say a word and have a shower every 10 minutes until you've learned your lesson properly. You can't utter a more genocidal phrase than that, And of course you always do it in a display of your care for the world. It's like, well, if we just didn't have any people, it's like, well, we'll just line them all up and shoot them with machine guns. No, it's really sickening. It's appalling. And there's a hatred for humanity that's at the bottom of it. And I mean, you can kind of understand why, because we're messy and, we don't clean up after ourselves, and, we're like raping the rainforests and that sort of thing. But I do have some sympathy for people because, we're hell on Mother Nature, but she certainly returns the favor, so. And that's a good thing to remember, a lot of what we're doing is just bloody well trying to exist with a relative minimum of pain. And we're doing our best to get as good at doing that as fast as we can. And that's not an easy thing. There are lots of us, and life is bloody complicated. And the other thing that happens too is, again, if you scratch just beneath the surface of people, and this is something that's always, to me has been a kind of miracle, is if you talk to someone, they're out doing their job, and maybe they're doing a good job at it, like some emergency room nurse, God, there's a job for you. Or maybe they work in palliative care. And you talk to them and you find out they've got 4 as I said before, serious problems in their family, and maybe they're diabetic to boot, and yet they haul themselves out of bed in the morning and go take care of dying people. It's like, good God, people deserve a bit of respect for struggling forward and not always trying to make the planet a worse place when they're beset on all sides constantly by, you know, an unending series of tragedy. You'd think we could have a little bit of sympathy for ourselves as a consequence of that. It's like we're not all like rapacious, greedy monsters who are bent on just devouring everything in our path, you know. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So